any second. We'll say it's live. Live. We're live.
Let's see if it actually. Oh, he tweeted it. Let me retweet the right thing.
Yeah. Oh, did Scott tweet too?
Yes.
Fueling tweets.
Oh, there we go.
So exciting.
Now I can see you.
We can all
did the wrong thing.
Multiple tweeting.
No, I'm trying to pop out the chat window. You know, all this takes like multiple effort. There we go. I need to see Twitter. I need to see the chat. I need to see you. Microphone. Okay, I'm good.
This is exciting. So Hisham already noticed your new microphone. Well, your new microphone setup.
Yeah, the microphone is the same microphone, but it's now on a stand with a pop filter. So now when I type, in theory, it shouldn't be ringing through everybody's ears as I type now, because it's in a spider mount or shock mount, whatever you call those things. Yeah, and I don't know what the pop filter does. I'm not an audio person. I mean, I appreciate good audio, but I don't know what the pop filter does. You can tell me.
The pop filter is specifically for things like popping peas.
Oh, really? What's a popping key when it pops off the keyboard?
No, P, the letter P.
Like that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, so like any kind of percussive.
What is it? It dampens it or something? Is it bad for the microphone or something? Or is it just...
No, it's loud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Saves you T's and S's and P's.
Yeah, so there's actually a different thing. It's especially for like P's. For an S, you actually normally would use a de-esser, but that's a post-processing thing.
Wow. Look at this. We're all going high tech now. So hopefully I sound even better than you and Scott now. Scott will be joining us. He's having some machine issues as per usual. I'm assuming he's got some random daily build of 14 different things on his machine, which is why his audio in Chrome doesn't work. We will find out.
Yep.
But we are here.
Yes.
We are here along with 60 other people. So
that's cool. I'm juggling things. So we have been looking at switching over to using we're interested if people are seeing this in HD or we'll see the recording in HD especially. Because so I've changed the latency mode and then we're looking at setting it up with OBS, but there's some complications there and how we do it. So I don't know.
Yeah. Once we go to sort of self-production, it's a whole massive jump. We'd have to choose our video calling tech. We'd have to, obviously it wouldn't do the focus switching when people talk. We'd have to direct that manually. We'd be doing the encoding ourselves. Like it would, it's all doable. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Now we just join a call.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think Hansman's looking for the link again.
All right.
He's ready to join again.
Let me see. Hansman.
Yeah, someone says they see 720p, which is what you get on Hangouts. So,
right.
Max is 720. Yep, that is right.
Good. So yeah, the latency on there, and I hadn't changed it before. I don't think the latency was set to low latency, which would have made the recording quality worse.
All right.
Trade-off of quality versus speed.
Well, my audio should be buttery smooth now.
Wonderful.
Well,
I guess I can start with our community links while we're waiting for Scott.
Yes, let's go to John Loves Community.
That's one thing we need theme music for the different sections.
We do. We need like a little sample so we can just hit a button like at a radio desk. Yeah, we should get on that.
Awesome. Okay, so Meher went through and he wanted to write about. He was inspired by David Fowler's tweet about you got to use Docker. So he went through, and I pointed out before the recent video by Mark Rendell. And so basically he kind of live blogged his going through this kind of stuff. So he just kind of said, here's what I did, and here's how it worked for me and all that kind of stuff. The cool thing with this, I mean, really, you can run through this yourself in a matter of a few minutes. But it is good to see, this is kind of his steps on how he went through.
I have a confession to make.
What's that?
I have never run Docker ever in my life.
We'll edit that out.
I've never. I think I've installed it once or twice, and I think I've literally never run it. And I feel bad about it, to tell you the truth. I really need to do it, but I just haven't had that task. That need hasn't arisen yet that I've forced myself to sit down and go, I'm going to make a Docker thing.
Yeah.
Build my app in Docker. I just haven't done it yet.
The actual run an app in Docker, it was kind of a surprisingly non-event for me. Like I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to do some Docker. I crack my fingers and I step through. I'm like, oh.
I think it's far more impactful when you are running, like when Fowler's been looking at it in the scope of, we're doing some more Tekken Power work again, and he's wanting to replicate other frameworks results.
Yeah.
And so he's using Docker to get all the prerequisites set up, because, you know, some of them are Java apps, some of them are C++, some of them are this and that, and he doesn't want to have to install all the various frameworks and dev tools and things to get that happening. He just wants to start a Docker container for a given benchmark and have it do all the building and stuff inside of it and then just go away.
Yeah.
That's where you really see the benefit, is things like build servers and you know, when you have a lot of prereqs that require setup, and now you don't have to do it. It's just all contained in your Docker image. So,
well, it's not only that, I mean, obviously you don't just have to do it the first time, but it's also reproducible, right? So you can just spin that Docker, you can save a Docker file out and do 20 of them, spin it up and spin it down. All
right.
That.
It's like having it's literally that shipping container thing, right? It's like having an amazing script that sets up your VM and then shuts it down on every time the app starts.
Yep.
It's pretty cool.
Okay, so this is a big one. So Dominic writing about the Identity Server 4 V2 release. So obviously the big feature here is ASP.NET Core 2 support. Also some other things like back channel logout spec, federation scenarios, internal cleanup, and then support for ASP.NET Core config system. Also really nice.
Nice. So that's Identity Server 4 version 2.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, naming
That's
card.
fine. Like, I mean, I just wanted to make sure I got it right.
I think for Identity Server 4, this is the big, like, major. Yeah, I guess almost like the product name. I'm sure someone will correct us on chat or something. But and also cool here, he's got 89 contributors to this, or they did. So
nice.
All right. So Chris announcing here the WS Federation 2.0 Preview 1 out of band release.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to say anything about this.
Sure.
Honestly,
so WS Fed, or WS Federation, is one of the WS Star standards for doing federated authentication, and it was used by Active Directory federated services, as my understanding, ADFS in Windows Server 2012. I want to say it's not used anymore in 2016. But if you're running sort of on-prem Windows Active Directory with federated auth in sort of the 2012 timeframe, which a lot of people are, then this is the standard, excuse me, that gets used. And so we didn't have support for this in ASP.NET Core. It had a bunch of downstream or upstream, I don't know which way that is, dependencies that hadn't been ported to .NET Standard / .NET Core yet. That work is now all complete. And so we were able to retrospectively fix that by shipping a 2.0 package out of band, obviously after 2.0, to add WS Federation support. So this is the first preview. We really need people to try it out and log issues, as it says there on the security repo. And this will allow customers who need to integrate with other systems that are doing WS Fed auth do so. We now support that. So you can authenticate people using WS Fed and all the other great things you need to do. So
nice. Okay. And he's got some code samples here at the end too, which is kind of cool. Yep. So this one here, I saw this come across. This is your talk on Razor Pages that you gave at NDC Sydney.
Yeah, I finally got to do my Razor Pages talk and have it recorded.
So, and I noticed in here you explain kind of your thoughts, because I know we've talked about that in the past. Like, what is the sweet spot? Like, what is Razor Pages for and stuff? And that was right at the beginning. You're explaining that.
Yeah, pretty much anytime you're generating HTML on the server.
Cool.
That's my opinion. That's what it was built for. So yeah.
Okay. Are slides for this available?
Yes, I did share the slides on a follow-up tweet.
Okay. I saw you shared slides for your ASP.NET Core 2.
Oh, you might be right, because this has very little slides.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, hardly any.
Awesome. Okay. So then I saw also here, this is a short post, but Glenn posted about the SignalR for ASP.NET Core Alpha 2. So this is quickly following on the previous Alpha 1 release.
Yep. So this is another out of band. Yep.
Yep, and some relatively small changes here, right? I mean,
so we fixed some issues that came up as a result of the first alpha that people reported. We've made some API changes. This is why this is an alpha, but this is nowhere near done yet, right? We're trying to put out a minimum sort of set of scenarios so that we can get feedback on some of the big changes and the new improvements. And so we're thankful for people who try out these very early releases. They really, really help shape the product. And I've been harping on about it recently, but We have struggled to get a lot of preview coverage recently, especially broad. Like we tend to get the same people who use our previews, which is good. We get good feedback from them, but I'd love to see us get a little more broad sort of usage of our preview so we can get more broad feedback. It's often the case that we don't get key feedback items until well after we've shipped an RTM, and then it becomes very hard for us to change things in a real way. So yeah, I strongly encourage people to go and try this out. As I said, bunch of bug fixes. There's a TypeScript, JavaScript client, a C# client, the binary hub protocol is in there using message pack, and we fixed some leaks and stuff. So hopefully it should be a little, but it's not ready for production. So don't ask. It's an alpha. It's called an alpha for a reason. If you're going to put in production, that's your prerogative. That's your business, not mine. But it's an alpha.
Are there any recommendations you have for somebody that, you know, that would want to help with testing? Like, is it helpful for people to clone the repo and run the tests, or do you want them to build small mini apps? I mean,
we need people to use it, right? We need people to use it in apps. And I know that's hard because it's not for production, but we get a lot of valuable feedback from people going, oh, I'm going to try and implement, you know, X. Or if you have some time available and you have a Signaler app and you want to try and reproduce some of that on ASP.NET Core, you know, there should be enough to do that now, and give us some feedback based on the changes and stuff that we've made, or things that you think we've missed, or things that you really wanted us to fix but we haven't done yet, et cetera, et cetera. So
cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So featuring another of Jack's, you know, I always kind of like, I go back and forth about featuring a series because I don't want to keep giving the same person too much airtime, but this is a really, really good post. So he's posted, what he's been doing is digging into a repo, going beyond the just kind of like, here are the features, or here's how this one thing works, and really kind of digging more in depth. So here he's looking at action results, which are very important for MVC and how MVC functions. So he goes through some things like what is a view result and things like that. What I think is really kind of great here is that he's got some nice diagrams here, and so he's showing, you know, how a view result is executed.
Nice.
You know, and explaining that out, explaining the executor. This is, I remember the first time kind of tracing through this when I was really trying to learn MVC, like writing a book, and really, really wanted to deeply understand it. There's more to it than you'd think, you know, as far as how these things, and it does allow it to be very pluggable, but it also, there's a good amount in there. So this is very, you know, view localization, how you can customize it, all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, and I hope, I mean, there is complexity, obviously. We hope that the complexity is laid in such a way that you don't really pay for it until you need it. And if you're not returning views, then the whole branch to do with view execution, you know, goes away. If you're just doing, I have a controller with some methods, you know, there's a filter pipeline before that. If the pipeline is empty, then there's not much going on there. Obviously, there's model binding if you choose to use it, which I don't know how you wouldn't, but, you know, and validation, those type of things. And they are all, like you said, sort of subsystems that the more you dig in, the more you'll learn about them. One of the efforts we're looking at moving forward in ASP.NET Core is trying to understand what parts of like this system of MVC really should be lower down in the stack. When we build ASP.NET Core, we didn't really take anything that was in MVC and bake it lower. Like we didn't kind of say, oh, okay, that's the new unit of composition for an ASP.NET Core app, and that needs to be in the core. Like we just did that for middleware. That was really it, and DI. But things like routing are still separate. You know, routing is not a given. When you add MVC, it adds its own router. So if you are not in MVC, you can't see URLs for any other stuff in MVC or the rest of the app. And that's actually a huge problem that we're looking to fix in 2.1 with something called dispatching, which is effectively global routing, which will move to by default, so that, you know, basically everyone can participate in the business of describing endpoints in the app, generating URLs for the app, you know, gathering metadata and storing metadata for endpoints in the app, all those type of things. And then we want to, over time, as I said, look at what's in MVC and decide, are there more things that need to be that are common concerns that really should be brought down? The whole concept of an action result. If you build raw middleware, hello, Scott. This is mobile, Scott.
I am so frustrated right now.
Are you just running like crazy daily builds or something, or like what's going on?
It's not. It's Chrome.
So you have a broken TV, and you have a broken client.
Don't do that to him.
Yeah, the TV is a huge issue. But no, I broke. So I had this problem earlier. I did a podcast, and the podcast API uses podcast app is the Zencaster app that uses the HTML5 audio API.
Yep.
And I noticed that I could not hear them. So I ended up going into incognito mode. and that worked. But it can't hear me outside. So I can get, but then I tried, anyway, I've tried 2 different machines. Something is wrong with Chrome build 62 or whatever I'm on, and now I'm on my phone.
Well, it's nice to see.
I apologize. I'm very frustrated right now.
I can appreciate that. I have a new toy. Look, I have a mount for my microphone.
That's
so
lovely.
he can type. He can type like
mad. I can
mad.
now type like a madman.
I love that you have professional headphones, a top-of-the-line camera, a nice mount, and I'm on an iPhone right now walking.
And you still look pretty damn good, I have to say. You don't sound anywhere near as good as us, I think. But
I don't see the magical HD label though.
no, that is true. It does look pretty.
I just remembered. I need to do that review of the video.
Yes.
And we need to send it back.
Oh, that's unfortunate. I really like this camera.
Can Hunter give us money for it?
I don't know. He bought these for me, but these were like $7. So.
Just go rummage through his desk.
Like
the camera's not $7.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Oh well, never mind.
I apologize for interrupting. Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm running through the community links. I got two left to go.
I was just to finish the thought I was on. So we're looking at more of those core concerns in MVC that perhaps should be pulled down and be core primitives in ASP.NET Core. And one of those that is interesting is the idea of an action result. If you're building middleware today, and especially if you're like a package author and you want to build a great piece of middleware that people can put in their apps, middleware usually does one of 2 things. It's either pass through, it looks at the request on the way in, it does something, the request keeps going, and then maybe it looks at it the way out and modifies it and whatever, or it's terminal, it's an endpoint in the application. If it's an endpoint and you want to return stuff, you're on your own. Like all we give you is the response stream. There's no composition model for returning HTML or JSON or any of that stuff in the middleware pipeline. All that stuff is obviously in MVC, which is sort of much higher up the stack, which is unfortunate. There's a lot of class of middleware, whether they be like our own diagnostics pages, for example, that show the developer diagnostics page or the error page, things like Swashbuckle that have a pre-canned UI. Those things, it's probably too much to have all of MVC or to have to force the app owner to plug those into their instance of MVC. You probably just want a very simple way to return a result. So here's a result, execute it, and then you can decide what that is. So those are ideas that we're looking at to figure out whether we can take more of the goodness of MVC, pull it apart, and really distill it down to its core fundamental bits, and go from there.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So this one, this is Ibrahim, and he's just talking about why you should get on .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. So this is a more high level, just if you're new to ASP.NET, if you are new to ASP.NET Core, why he's excited about it.
This is a fan post, right?
It's a fan post. It's pretty cool though. It's just like, hey, look at all this great stuff. Here's what's built in. Here's Kestrel's cool, Rider's cool, Docker's cool, just all this stuff. So, and down at the bottom, he actually does a disclaimer. I don't work for Microsoft. I just love it. So it's kind of cool to see this overall feedback.
Cool.
There's that. And then Hisham talking about using PO file localization in ASP.NET Core 2 using Orchard Core. And this is something I've talked to Sebastian recently. I think it would be worthwhile to get him on just to talk about some of these features in Orchard Core that can, like the work they've done in Orchard Core to kind of piece things out so you can pull in just cool little features of Orchard into an ASP.NET.
Yeah, I mean, Orchard Core is really an engine. Like it's an application engine or a platform, and then there's it's many just ASP.NET Core libraries that you can pull into any ASP.NET Core app, or you can choose to compose them into sort of the Orchard Core engine. And so if you just want to do the PO file localization, you can use Orchard's PO file localizer. It just plugs straight into any ASP.NET Core app as if it was like one that the ASP.NET Core team made. I mean, Seb works in the ASP.NET Core team. He does this stuff for us, but he's doing it as part of the Orchard project. But that's similar to some other things. They have a client asset manager API with a set of tag helpers and server-side API that then sort of pulls it all together and renders it down for sort of componentized apps. So they have a lot of really interesting stuff.
That asset manager, I did a Code Conversations interview with him. And so, yeah, it's like you're saying, it's a really full-featured asset pipeline thing. And it handles some pretty cool stuff. Like if you reference things multiple times, it makes sure that they're not referenced, but you know what I mean, that they're not included multiple times. It does a lot of kind of intelligent stuff. So yeah, cool. So here's just the code sample. This is basically all there is to it to use PO file, which is, I guess, portable object. I didn't know that. Portable object localization.
Cool.
Excellent stuff. I'm going to stop screen sharing.
There's a lot of activity in the chat today. Which is
There's
really,
a ton.
Really nice to see.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to jump into before
I tweeted a few weeks ago. I kind of wanted Hanselman to be online for this though, because I kind of wanted his guidance when approaching this topic.
I can do it if it's not inappropriate to do it like this.
No, it's perfectly fine.
This is great. Actually, I saw HD from you, Scott. If that makes you feel better.
Do you like the lens flare?
It's wonderful.
I do.
It does say HD on yours, Scott.
It also makes me transparent.
It does make you transparent,
which I think is nice.
Yes.
Let me see if I can fix that. Yeah, there's no way. I'm always going to look.
No, you look better there. That's not too bad. Just stand there and don't move. You look great. There we go. There we go. So what kicked it off is you did a blog post, Scott, I don't know, 4 weeks ago. And it was highlighting some open source framework. Let me see if I can find it. And as you usually do, you do some great you highlight great stuff you see in the community, you talk about stuff that we do, you kind of do a whole bunch of different stuff, right? This one in particular, I'm trying to make sure it'd be nice to have the context. Was
it logging?
Pardon?
Was it logging?
It might have been the blog template on the 14th.
Okay.
Or
one that the interns did.
No, I know what it was. It was the one on the 7th. It was the T4 MVC, R4 MVC, Roslyn code generators.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, there's no T4 support right now, so people have made a Roslyn version of that. It's quite nice.
Yes, and so you wrote your blog post, you highlighted it, and one of the first comments was, or a couple of the comments, if I recall, were people who were quite clearly disappointed that we hadn't bothered to do that work and put it in the box. And I think it was along the lines of, I don't understand why Microsoft doesn't include this type of functionality and build this themselves. And that struck a nerve with me, I have to say. Because I think that represents the other side of the spectrum to what a lot of the other feedback that we've gotten from the open source community in the past, which is, we say we want to go off and build X, feature X, and then we get asked, well, why don't you just use this thing that already exists?
Sure.
Which is the exact opposite, right? It's like we want to go and provide an end-to-end experience, or we want to, solve a certain problem a certain way, and rightly so, someone will point out, oh, well, this incumbent has been here forever, or this random library that's out there, it seems to do what you want. Why don't you just use that?
To be clear, just so that you don't use language that's a little bit, with all due respect, a little flippant.
Sure.
There are widely respected incumbents that have been there for many years, like your N-hibernates.
Sure.
And then there's your random library that
yeah, and I said both, to be clear.
Yeah, just to be clear.
Yeah, just to be clear. I'm not trying to dump everyone in the same category. I'm simply saying that there are both,
and then there's
and a gamut in between.
Gradients in between, of course.
Yeah. And we have examples where we've done that, whether it's something like JSON.NET, where we decided to take the clear incumbent and ship that. And I found that paradox, those two viewpoints, those two ends of the spectrum, striking. And it's something that I think, I'm not sure people think about how we have to walk that sort of that line between those two opposing viewpoints. And I think they both have merit. I think that both of those come from a genuine place. And it's something I just wanted to say that we constantly we talk about, we constantly, battle's a strong word, lowercase b, but battle with whenever we want to take on building any type of new feature or looking at an end-to-end experience that we want to build. Sometimes it can be difficult to build end-to-end experiences that meet the vision that we have using 4 different libraries built by 4 different authors for 4 different purposes with different visions. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes we can take something very generic and utilitarian, and we can plug it in at a certain layer, and it's good for everyone. But there are side effects every time we take dependencies on third-party libraries. There was a discussion we had recently on Twitter with Brad Wilson.
There was that one. Oh yeah.
About JSON.NET in particular,
right,
which was an interesting one. He was complaining that the side effect of us taking dependency on something like JSON.NET is that if JSON.NET releases a new version that introduces some type of breaking change, and it can be very subtle, right? It doesn't have to be a large one. It makes it practically impossible to use the new version of that library in an ASP.NET Core app if we've taken a dependency on the current behavior. Okay, because if you update, NuGet will let you update. That's perfectly fine. But once you update, your ASP.NET Core app may now be broken, depending on what that third-party library author decided to do in that version. Okay. And, that can devolve into arguments about Semver and how you should apply Semver to .NET and NuGet, which frankly, I think we should do a better job of coaching and leading the ecosystem on. It's not simple. I will say that outright, that following Semver, just do Semver is really not an answer. Like it's actually incredibly complicated to do properly. So yeah, I just wanted to, like I said, when that comment came up, I found it really striking, and that I hadn't heard that articulated in a while, and it was the opposite end of the spectrum to a lot of the feedback we have received recently. And I just wanted people to know we do hear both sides, and we do constantly think about what the right choice is for the majority of customers. And when we have to make a default choice which leans one way, we also think very hard about what it is to let people do the opposite of that, right? So
I think also that it is challenging for people who are on the outside to understand what the inside is like. But it's difficult to, like I was talking to Kathleen Dollard, right? Kathleen is a widely respected technologist who's been doing .NET for as long as it existed and has been in the industry for 25, 30 years, right? And she's been there now, what, 3 months?
Yeah, if that, yep.
So I was talking with her about how it was going and how her work was. And she says, I thought I understood how complicated things were working for a company that ships software to 1 billion PCs.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start looking at security checks and poly checks and localization and testing and on and on and on and on. And while it's easy to say, hey, that was a bad build and that was an easy bug and you should have seen that, or why didn't you just use foo.net? That's a thing I wrote in college that you should just use. You kind of have to be in the security reviews or the polycheck reviews or the whatevers to really understand how complicated it is to ship to 1 billion machines.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it doesn't feel like that when you hit the bug that affects you and your company, because all you then see is that bug, and all that matters is that bug and why we suck.
All the things like long-term support, I mean, like Damien indicated some, but all those things.
And doing it in such a way that people can still understand it. Like we have version soup as it is right now with .NET Core, and we're working very hard to really make sure we're cognizant of every version that shows up and it's there for a reason, and can people understand it, and when do they change, and is it understandable that this one changes now and that one changes then. But it's difficult. Every way you decide to go has a side effect, has many side effects. There are ripple effects that I think are difficult to see. And I mean, when I started, I didn't know them. And to be fair, I know a lot of them now, and I still bitch about them internally. If I come across a bug, like, oh my God, how did that team not find that? And of course, we're just as guilty as that of everybody. Like, I mean, I understand what it's like to be in an app developer's shoes when you hit that type of issue. It's like, how did they not see this? It's complicated. It's just really, really complicated stuff. And we do constantly have to walk the line about, we are literally trading off between maybe 14 different variants on any given decision. And it's not as simple as coming up with one guiding sort of flowchart decision tree policy that we use. Like it's quite nuanced. And, Scott knows this, and John knows this, and Scott's been in some of our triage meetings before and seen the sausage being made. And, we pain over a lot of these things. And I'd love to be able to have a magic wand and just fix everything I want to fix, irrespective of any, impact it might have on a certain set of customers. But, we can't. We have to find solutions that work for the majority and then give workarounds for the minorities a lot of the time, which is unfortunate. But, .NET Core was a great opportunity for us because we got to try and design a whole bunch of things from scratch. But obviously we had some false starts.
One different thing that I see now is, and apologies for cutting in, I hope it's along with the flow here, but one thing that I've seen change a lot over the time I've been at Microsoft is that how open you're able to be now with your decision-making process. So, because the code is developed on GitHub, because you're making announcements of intention and you're shipping, and changes are being made a while before the NuGet package, which is a while before the meta package or the big ship date. Does that make it easier or harder or just different?
I think it's. I mean, again, I think it depends on your perspective. I know for a fact that there are people who think we aren't anywhere near open enough, and I sometimes think that as well. There is a cost to being completely open, and we're not completely open. We openly admit that. Like, we've been going through sort of I call it the business phase of our product planning right now, where we're looking at what our directors want our business goals to be for the next N months or years. for the next set of versions we're working on. And then they hand us a list of requirements that aren't, you must have this API and this feature. They're like, you must address this problem space. And then we have to interpret from that the best way to address those problem spaces by building features or doing some marketing or, you know, whatever it might be. And so a lot of our requirements fall out of that process before it even hits GitHub, you know, in the public area. We do a lot of that sort of that high level planning behind closed doors, but the API level planning is very much in the open. Like, you know, once you have to code in GitHub, it's in GitHub, like everyone can see it, right? And then we get feedback and we do previews and all that stuff is very iterative. But I know for a fact that, you know, I'm sure plenty of people would like us to, would like to have a lot more input somehow, or democratize somehow the actual features that get built, right? I know other projects, you know, do have things like that, but they certainly don't all work that way. And I know some people, for better or worse, think that is their definition of open source, but that's certainly not, you know, how we do it. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. We certainly take feature ideas, we take pull requests, and as I said, we work collaboratively with a lot of people in the community to work on the implementations, and we talk to customers a lot. We reach out to customers and actually go and do phone calls with them and sit with them and generally to discuss a particular problem area that we think is interesting, that we think might be solvable by some set of features. And so we try and find customers that we think are experiencing those issues, and we have them tell us what their issues are, and then we try and find the common, you know, all the sort of standard sort of product planning stuff, which I imagine a lot of our customers themselves do if they are software developers writing software for other people. You know, we just do it at sort of the lower level down at the framework level. So yeah, it's I'm seeing some feedback here in the chat, which is good. It seems like it was good for some people to hear both sides of the argument. And all I can say is that we continue to try and refine that. We're not always going to get it right for everybody, and I apologize in advance. Sometimes I reach out to Scott and I say, Scott, can you talk me off the ledge and help me figure out how to message this particular change or do this or that? Or
it's important for us to remember that we can come off, we the ones in Microsoft who work here can come off as minimizing other people's concerns.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a lot of all of us, both Microsoft people internally and customers externally, just doing stuff. Oh, well, just do this. And oh, well, why don't you just do that? And we minimize it by saying versioning is hard, which is a short way to not give a really long answer, right? And then, you know, but like, for example, you say stuff like, we're open, but then we're not really open. And that makes me wonder, like, what are we not being open about? You know, like...
Well, some of that, I mean, yeah.
And I think I mean, I hope I just explained what I meant by that when I just said that.
Yeah. I'm saying that people can take stuff out of context.
Yes, absolutely. There's always that danger.
And we've seen what Twitter can do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think forums like this is one of the very reasons we created this show, right? If you think right back to over 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when we started ASPNET Core or DNX, whatever it was at the time, and we were seeing a lot of FUD in the community about, you know, people would see code and had heard some third-party person pontificate or have an opinion about something, about what we were doing, not hearing it from us, and then something would start. It was like, you know, we've got to be able to talk frankly in an open forum and be able to have people talk to us, you know, weekly. So this is kind of why we started this show. And I think we haven't talked about some of this stuff for a while. And this, like I said, this comment just kind of brought it up, and I think it's worthwhile. Sure. Like you said, touching point on this every now and then and acknowledging that, yeah, you know, we're guilty as anyone of perhaps over trivializing certain people's problems sometimes. All I ask is that I think it goes both ways. I think sometimes people trivialize what our problems are as well. And they, as you said before, it feels very, everyone has a narrow perspective when it hits them. And it can be very difficult to see the wider picture. And,
if you've hit a bug and we tell you that 0.01% of people hit it, that doesn't change the fact that 100% of people who are you hit it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, and if we ultimately decide not to do it,
this is totally broken. This thing doesn't work at all. Right.
Right. And then a lot of it is working through language as well, in the sense that when someone uses phrasing like this is completely broken, we need to understand what that means to that person, because that can mean that the performance is unacceptable or the level of complexity is unacceptable. I can't figure out how to use it. It could be a particular type of error they're getting under certain conditions. And, you know, a lot of it is just that type of diagnosis. And we've had a lot of that recently, trying to ensure that we understand what people mean when they say, this is not working for me, it's fundamentally broken. it can sometimes take a fair bit of digging to really get to the crux of the issue.
Question for you on that. I've seen some projects on GitHub use GitHub issue templates and pull request templates to kind of, here's a form. When I create a new issue, it says, what version are you running? It does, and some even use the kind of checklist syntax to say, like, is it a hard crash? Is it just frustrating? Do we use those at all? I don't think
we do. They're called issue templates. Okay. Unfortunately, a lot of people just delete them because the way it works is when you create a new issue, they kind of like spits a whole bunch of stuff into the issue, and then you're supposed to fill it out. But a lot of people just Control A, delete, and then type their stuff. But that's fine. Like, I mean, it's a suggestion. You fill those things in, it's more likely that we won't have to do follow-up questions. It'll be easy to triage and those type of things. But sometimes it's pretty clear cut. You can just paste a stack trace and say, this is what I called. Obviously, this shouldn't happen. But just think like a developer. If it was your product and of a similar size, and you were trying to you wanted someone to report the issue to you, just share as much information as you possibly can, and it'll help us, obviously. Okay. So anyway, I got that off my chest. We're all, I want people to keep giving us that feedback. Like, I want to understand all ends, like both ends of the spectrum and everything in between. So it was really, as I said, interesting to see that comment on Scott's blog when I've heard so much of the other side. I hadn't really heard that side for quite some time. And it's something that we've been talking about. We've used that, I don't want to say defense, but we've used that reasoning for some decisions we've made in the past about, well, we want something that's in box. There are reasons we can't always take dependencies on third parties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was interesting to get an outside opinion along the lines of, why does Microsoft just build this thing? I don't understand why the community had to do it. I think obviously there's a happy equilibrium somewhere where we provide enough inbox value that, you get a really good feature set out of the box. Some of that might come from some open source libraries that are on the periphery, but we provide by default, which you can swap out with a different one if you want. And then other things are a little more niche or a little more specialist, and the community does a really good job of running with those and providing good solutions for them. And then there's always that, how do we as big corporate Microsoft do the best job we can of promoting those type of things? And that's something I know, Scott, we've been trying to tackle that beast for a long time. And there's a lot of eyes that go into things like what templates show up in Visual Studio by default, which one is ticked by default. A lot of opinions are filtered and sifted through at Microsoft before that decision is made. And so, it's not always easy just to make everyone happy, obviously. So there's a bunch of questions in here. Do we want to, actually, there was a couple of, before I did that, was a couple.
And try to reboot my computer. So I will.
Okay. A couple of things that we're working on recently, I just wanted to touch on. We've been doing some looks at Tekken Power again. David Fowler created a repo, if you want to look at his GitHub, called Platform Tekken Power, I think. So Tekken Power has a couple different, ratings, like levels for their benchmarks. They have a platform, which is the lowest level. Basically, no one codes directly against the platform because you won't be productive, right? It's a raw HTTP server, and there's no dispatching logic, and there's no friendly APIs for returning strings. You're doing bytes, and if you want to do JSON, you pull in your own JSON library and stuff like that, right? So then there's the micro above that, which is like, oh, okay, it's a micro framework. You have dispatching. You might have some helper methods for dealing with text and file uploads and stuff like that. And then there's what they call full, which is, would be our MVC framework as a full framework. Our middleware layer is what we call a micro framework. And we don't have a platform entry. We don't have a platform entry for .NET at all. And so what we've been looking at, what would a platform entry for Tekken Power look like, specifically for the plain text and JSON scenarios right now? Because most of nearly all of the top 10 are platform entries. They're not micro framework or full framework. One of the things we pride ourselves on is ASPNET Core in Tekken Power for plain text is actually one of the top micro frameworks and one of the top full frameworks. It's in the top 3. But everything else above us, other than those ones, are rated as platforms. Okay, so they're a lot lower level. So it'd be interesting for us to have a platform submission to see how fast we can really push .NET as an engine with an HTTP server, the bits that make up Kestrel, with a very, very thin layer on top of that, for the purposes of the benchmark. So we've been doing some investigations there, and if people who are really interested in that type of stuff, I know there are people who are, then you should go and jump on, have a look at David Fowler's repo, because there's some alternate models in there right now. One of these things is also that we get to see where we lose performance. So as we add back features from the actual framework on top of this platform level thing, excuse me, how much perf do we use? What does it really cost to have a nice incoming header dictionary where everything's been turned into a string for you already, rather than dealing with a raw, memory mapped chunk of memory that came off the network? What does it really cost you to have nice methods for writing out certain file types, or nice methods for doing dispatching, like routing type stuff, other than you manually looking at the HTTP request line and then figuring out what the path is. Like, every one of those niceties has a cost. And by doing this exercise, we can actually start to ascertain what those various layers cost us in terms of a very raw benchmark like that. So it's actually a really interesting exercise for people, should they so wish to see. Another thing that was in a couple of other things, excuse me, I've had a cold, so that's why I'm coughing. I apologize to everyone. There will be a stream coming up soon. It might be next week. I have to check the date. On Channel 9, I believe, where we're going to talk about the next release. So we'll do a sort of a roadmap recording or a live stream. It'll be with me, my boss, Scott Hunter, and Richard Lander, who's my counterpart for .NET. And we're going to talk about all up sort of the features and big rocks, as we call them, that we're planning for the next level. And that'll kind of be the essentially the public launch of the end of our planning effort for 2.1, and then we'll see the real work start. So that's coming up, and we'd love to get people to watch that and give us feedback on that, so that we can get involved in the 2.1 stuff nice and early. The other thing, as part of that, or before that, we're discussing some potential improvements around how ASP.NET Core apps run on top of a platform right now. So in 2.0, we introduced this thing called the runtime store. If you recall, it's all the stuff is in there. It's engined already. So when you publish your app, we trim it out so you don't have to take it with you, because it's assumed you already have that stuff in the runtime store, and it works pretty well. It does turn out it has some issues now that it's out in the wild, and we have to think about servicing it, deploying it to multiple environments. We have run into some design issues with the runtime store that we're working through some potential changes to fix those. Right now, the plan hopefully would be very transparent. It would be basically you wouldn't notice any change. So you would install some 2.0x version of the platform. You would open your project, change the ASP.NET Core package from 2.0 to 2.0x, 2.05, or whatever it's going to be. And that's it. You would rebuild and run, and everything would just work and be running on top of whatever this new improved way of achieving the same things are. I just want to give people a heads up to that. You're going to see a little bit more about that in the near future as we work through those things. But we want to keep all the benefits we get at the runtime store while solving a few of the issues that it's started to present now that we're seeing it out in the wild. And it should be good for people. I think the end result is going to be better in a lot of ways. But we have a very strict goal of making sure it's as little disruption, if any, to people who are already running on 2.0. Obviously, we want that to be as seamless as possible. So right now, we think the plan will make it so that it's literally no trouble at all. You just install the new version, you update your project file, no other changes, like any other thing, and it would just work. So that's an interesting thing that's going on at the moment. And that was it. That's all I wanted to touch base on before we answer questions. So.
All right. Gosh, there's a lot of questions here.
I think if I scroll all the way back up, Nick asked a question in context of when I was talking about the idea of dispatching, which is like global routing. It's like, if it's global routing, why didn't you just call it global routing? I don't know. We couldn't call it routing because we already have a thing called routing. So we wanted to give it a name that denoted where it really fits in the pipeline. I think the current plan is that this thing basically sits at the end of the middleware pipeline and has the job of dispatching if something hasn't done it already. Based on the metadata that came with the request and all that type of thing. So it is quite literally the dispatcher. But yeah, it's naming. It is what it is. What else was there? I think he asked a couple other questions. Jonathan Channon pointed me to Botwin, which is one of his projects, which seems to be very much along the lines of some of the stuff I was talking about, which was what would it mean to take some of these core MVC principles or primitives like return an action result and bake them a lot lower down. He has a thing called Botwin that is seemingly an attempt to do that. It has some basic routing or dispatching type stuff and the ability to return results, which is kind of interesting. So if you're interested in that, he calls it a library that allows Nancy-esque routing for use in ASP.NET Core. So if you're interested in just the routing part of Nancy in ASP.NET Core, then look at Botwin. That looks like it's worthwhile. Cool. Luke Latham has asked, question, dropping Bower and bundle a minifier for library manager Pacman. How will Pacman work across tooling outside of VS? Does it need project file entries to work outside of VS? So I think I might have mentioned this in the last stand-up. I don't know. Current plan is we're going to drop Bower out of the templates in the next patch because Bower is effectively dead. And then we're going to replace that sometime after that. It will not be at the same time we drop Bower. With Library Manager, or Pacman, as it's being called. This is the prototype that Mads has had floating around for a couple of years. And similarly, the bundler minifier, we have a new thing that Mads has been working on, which is that supports both runtime and build time bundling and minification, and supports dispatching into Node, so that you can even do, you know, your bundle config, you know, at runtime, call out to a node-based npm task, right? And it's using the same work that we do in our SPA services to run Webpack on the server. And so you get the benefit at development time of everything being super dynamic and fast. You can just change a file and things get recompiled on the fly. And then when you publish, it all gets pre-done for you, and the output goes along with your application. So that is the direction. The timing is still being figured out. Ultimately, I want to get this out as quick as possible. I want us to move to the Pacman, which is the not a package manager, and it will work outside of VS. So it's actually going to be integrated into MS Build, just like the rest of the project system. So we're even toying with the idea of having a new item type in the project file to denote that you have basically a client package reference. If you want jQuery or Angular, whatever it might be, then you would just denote that in the CS proj. Like you do package ref today, you'd have a different one. Then the thing is pluggable itself. So where it actually goes off and gets the libraries from is an independent concern, and obviously we'd have defaults for that. So yep, that's coming along. What else? Could you explain how the automatic, this is from Frederick, how does the automatic light up of App Insights in Azure works, even though you do not say anything about App Insights in your code? Explain the magic injection. So in 2.0, we added a feature called Hosting Startup. Excuse me. And by way of environment variables, you can set an environment variable with a special name, ASPNET Core Hosting Startup Assemblies, I think it is, which is a semicolon, I think, delimited name of assemblies that we will attempt to load at the start of your ASP.NET Core application. And then we look for a certain interface that's implemented in those assemblies, and we call sort of go on it, right? Now, where do those assemblies go? They have to be somewhere that your app can load them. And so they're either in your dependency graph already, or they're injected into the application via another new feature, which was introduced in .NET Core 2, called additional deps, which is the ability to, again, use environment variable to tell the .NET Core runtime to load additional packages, essentially assemblies, into the application, even if they weren't originally depended on by the application. Because .NET Core is a lot more strict about loading assemblies than .NET Framework. It doesn't have Fusion, doesn't have the assembly loading logic that .NET Framework does. All of the assemblies that your application can reference are actually baked into that deps.json file when you build the application. If it's not in there, then you only get very rudimentary assembly loading support. So the additional deps support is the ability to have a pre-cooked sort of third deps file. You have the frameworks file, you have the apps file, and then you can have this additional file that you can kind of paste on top of the app at runtime via an environment variable, and then the host will allow those assemblies to be loaded if someone says, please go and load them. So it's the combination of those two features, one from the runtime and one from ASP.NET Core, that lets us basically find an assembly of a given name, find the types inside of it that implement a certain interface, and then call a method on them at the beginning of the application starting up when the web host is being built. And then that's where application insights in Visual Studio and in Azure can inject itself in and get its environment. It gets the instrumentation key from the environment, adds all the stuff to the DI container, adds the tag helper component, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's all first-class features that you can use yourself if you want to. Scrolling down, trying to find more questions. It's actually very helpful when people just mention my name, because then it highlights it in orange and I can just scroll down until I see it. So the people who ask me questions directly are getting preferential treatment. So Maria asked, what level of detail should we be giving to provide you with meaningful issues? Oh, is that what you were, it's so funny, is that what you were talking about before?
Well, she said that after I said the issue template, but yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the issue. Basically, we need enough details such that we can reproduce the issue. If we can't reproduce it, we can't fix it. That's what it really comes down to. So, I mean, the usual things: what platform are you on? What version are you using? If you can share your project file and your startup CS, that is immensely helpful a lot of the time. That'll make sure that there's no stale code, there's no misuse of APIs going on. You don't have mismatching versions or anything like that we can diagnose very quickly. It also gives us an overall sense of what your application is. If you can, the best thing is to try and reproduce the issue in a much smaller representative application. Just like distill the issue down to its core and then share that project with us is really, obviously it creates, it's more work. And sometimes you can't do that because the issue is so complex that it requires a whole bunch of moving parts, but that's really helpful when you can do that.
And sometimes it's funny, but sometimes the act of doing that shows you maybe if there's an issue with your code. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I've seen that myself where I'm like, this is a problem. Let me write a sample. And then you get it down. You're like, oh, it doesn't reproduce. Oh, my database was offline or something stupid.
Right. Yeah, Geeky Sacramento made a comment when we were making these decisions about third-party concerns or new features we want. We'd love to see MS push compatible interfaces. That's what we try. That's one of the strategies we take, and he uses the example of iLogger, and that's exactly why we did those things. Is when we have a deeply ingrained concern in our app stack that we want to provide out of the box with an implementation that we own, but we want obviously the application developer to be able to replace with a different implementation. Or have the wider community participate in that feature, then we often extend it in some way. Then we'll create an abstraction to do so. And iLogger is an example of one of those abstractions. So we try to do that in all the places that we think it makes sense. There's a whole bunch of arguments about which SPA framework we should be pushing. Vue.js, Aurelia.
Well, the nice thing is, I mean, you ship the big obvious ones out of the box, but then people can install project templates very easily.
Yeah.
I mean,
and just to address that right now, we ship Angular and Redux, React and Redux in the box because they are overwhelmingly the most used of those templates based on before we had them in the box, right? Like by an order of magnitude, I believe. And so putting Aurelia and Vue in there, we felt would just create confusion for people who were looking, to start out. And it just wasn't seeing the usage. People can install the Aurelia Vue knockout versions of those templates. We have them, we maintain them. They're just opt-in. They're just not in there by default. Okay? We just made a choice to put in the overwhelmingly popular ones by default rather than all of them. That's all it is.
Yeah, and it's super, like you said, it's super easy to use. Like you can do from command line, you can install those super easy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Someone is pointing out that there's a PR that's been sent to the MS Build repo, I think it's today, that improves the globbing performance upwards of 800%.
Yeah.
That's fantastic to hear.
Yeah, I was talking to the team. They said by far it's the hugest pull request they've gotten like ever for MS Build.
Some people saying the discussion is interesting. That's good to hear. Looking. Trying to parse out questions here. What level of detail? Oh, that's the same one. I think it must have scrolled away from me. Let's have a look. Okay, Frederick asks, when do we get easy ways to install tooling that gets picked up by the SDK attribute in the MS Build project node? Yes, we call that SDK acquisition. So people may have noticed in the new CS projects that we call these the SDK-based CS proj. There is a attribute on the project node called SDK, and it points to one of two things: the Microsoft Net SDK or the Microsoft Net Web SDK. What we would like is that you could put an SDK name in there that you don't currently have on your machine, and then when MS Build parses that CS proj file, the first thing it does is looks at the SDKs listed and goes, oh, you don't have those. Let me go and install those from NuGet for you into some global location on your machine and then build. So that we bootstrap the SDKs for you automatically as part of the project building process. I have no visibility into the status of that desire. I know it's being talked about. I'm not aware of it being on the backlog for the next release. There's probably an issue that talks about it in the MS Build repo. But that is the general idea. I don't have a status for you on when that's going to happen, though. I'm sorry. Right now, the big focus in sort of the MS Build style, the project system and the MS Build stuff for the next release is performance. Like we're working really, really, really hard to drastically improve the performance of multi-project, cross-compiling, multi-project solutions, package restores, all those type of things to do with using your project as a developer. We want to make that as fast as it can possibly be. So there's a lot of work going into that right now. Hence the globbing PR, which was external too. So that's even better. What else? Parsing. Have you seen any there that I've jumped over that I should be?
No. Yeah,
okay.
Discussion about the video quality. So hopefully overall, yeah.
All right. So at the end, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I think it's Sjord Vandermeer. What are the plans for identity application services? So That is in scope for 2.1 or next release. And we're still figuring out exactly what it's going to entail, but the current plan is that we will likely end up shipping more options for identity out of the box. So you can do the identity options we have today, which include the sort of in-app identity, which is just a database of stuff and usernames and passwords, or Azure B2C or Windows Auth or those type of things. But we'll add support, excuse me, for token server based stuff as well, where you run your own identity service using the identity bits that we already have, plus a new STS sort of middleware set of endpoints. And the other thing we're very keen on is making it easy to switch between one and the other, because today, you file new and you choose identity. If you do in-app identity, you get a 500-line account controller, which isn't particularly friendly. So we're looking at ways to factor a lot of that core logic into effectively a module, right? That's in the project already, and then you can swap that out for a different implementation if you want to, and extending that all the way to the UI as well. Like I'd really like to get to a place where we don't have to have all the identity views or pages in the application as well. Like if you just want the default login experience and the manage experience, you just get all that without having all those Razor files in your app. And then we have a customization facility that lets you use something like field templates or entity templates or partials or just spilling all the precompiled views in your app as a last resort, if you then want to go and customize things. So I think there's a whole bunch of there's a lot of click stops on the dial there that we can choose from, and we're sort of working through a lot of that right now. So yeah, it is in scope for 2.1. We will be doing something in that area. Oh, a couple more questions coming in now. Question: is there any way to see the live chat transcript for previously recorded sessions? No. My understanding is the live stream. We could write software that makes that work. There is an API to get access to the live chat stream while the broadcast is live. And so if we really wanted to, we could run a little bot that comes and scrapes it out and preserves it. But I don't know how we would present. I guess we would just save it as a chat. You could download it. But no, that's not something. The old Hangouts used to give us that. They used to have, you could play back the Hangout, and then like you would get, things would show up. Like
that's right. Yeah, it would show the thumbs up and down. Yeah.
But the YouTube streaming, which is what ultimately we're using right now, we're just doing it via Hangouts because they killed the Hangouts on air stuff. It doesn't have that. You have to do it yourself if you want to. So sorry, no. Will you ship default support for Jot Auth? That's from Eric. Yes. So that's part of the scope of the identity service stuff, is having support for Jot token authentication as part of the stack. So yes. Richard, will the server gen HTML code of tight quadruples? He sent me an email about this. HTML, TypeScript, CSS, and C# ever be so cute like the Pick Your Framework JS sparse source code tight triples, HTML, TypeScript, and CSS? I guess it's kind of like, will we ever have a first-class UI module where you can very easily encapsulate maybe a chunk of Razor, some client-side logic, some server-side logic, and some style sheet, right, into one nice little chunk and then use that? I don't know. I can certainly tell you that we have desires and lowercase p plans to continue improving Razor, especially its componentization. So we built tag helpers and we built view components in ASPNET Core, but we didn't really improve the composition model for Razor, and that's something that we care very deeply about. I think what you'll end up seeing, we don't have a first-class templating support in Razor. You can't build a Razor template from Razor and then like get it as a func that you can execute later and pass in the data to. The closest you have to that today is a partial. You can't write a tag helper in Razor. You have to write it in C#, right? And there are lots of cases where you might just want to write some Razor and have that appear as a tag helper. So we're thinking a lot about that, and such that in the future, we think we'll probably end up in a place where you can just build Razor components as a new thing. We'd have a thing called a Razor component, which you can write either in C# or Razor, and then they would be exposed very much like tag helpers are today. And so you could even see an extreme future where things like tag helpers and view components kind of all go away, and we just have this thing called Razor components, which have a whole bunch of different features. So yeah, that's some of the things we're thinking about. And I also hope it would then lead itself to getting rid of things like layout pages and sections as well, because the composition model today of layouts and sections with your content page isn't particularly nice. Passing data between them isn't first class. You have to put data in viewed data or view bag, which is horrible. It's untyped. Whereas I'd much rather see a typed component-based model where my page can set data on the layout page that it has declared it uses in a type-friendly, safe fashion. So I don't have to pass transparent objects through this weird view bag thing to have it pass from, say, my content page to the layout page and then into a partial, which is what these are the type of tricks you end up playing today. If you factor, say, your login details into a partial that's used by the layout page, but you have to get the current user or some detail from the current page. Like you have to bounce it through all these layers. We want to make that type of stuff a lot more first class. So yeah, things will improve. But getting all the way to things like TypeScript and CSS with that as well, we haven't really given that much thought yet, other than things like Blazor, which is like a whole other area of doing Razor in the client, right? So, all right, I am losing my voice.
One last thing, guest request for Barry Dorans and David Fowler. We've had David on before. People really want Barry.
David is hard to pin down. It's because he's usually in meetings.
Yeah.
We book him far enough in advance and we have a topic for him. Of course, that would be, it'd be good to get him to come in and talk about some of his aspirations for the underpinnings of Kestrel and stuff. He has this, is it Project Bedrock, I think is his code name. Of course, Barry is always fun. So, but again, we'd be good to have a topic.
Yeah.
To get him on. So we've actually started a schedule. We're going to slot in guests with topics, and once we have a bit of a roadmap for that, well, I guess we'll make it public so people can know who's going to come up at a certain date. What I'm thinking right now is we'll probably alternate between sort of the normal format show like this, where it's just me crapping on about something and answering questions, and then the next one we would do a guest and have them talk about something that they're interested in. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah.
That sounds great. And people, if you have a specific request, you can hit us on Twitter or maybe comments on the video, but I don't know if we'd see them. So Twitter is probably best.
Cool. All right.
All right. Dramatic zoom out.
You're going to lock me on?
Yeah. Okay. I'll lock you on. Do you sing your own song when Scott's not here?
I do. I mean, I have no voice left, but I'll try.
Okay. All right. Here we go.
Dramatic zoom out. It's so dramatic. I see. I lost it. Trailed off. Couldn't finish it.